When the dragons dance, death reigns on all those around them. This is a fact that's been proven every time we've heard of dragon riders fighting dragon riders. It used to happen a lot in old Valyria, apparently, but we'll never find out because the Doom burnt most of their histories. It happened once in Westeros before the dance, and that was at the beginning of the war-riddled 6-year reign of Maegor the Cruel, when Balerion made short work of Quicksilver. The Targaryens had fewer dragons then, however, and not nearly enough family members to claim them. During the Dance of the Dragons, 21 dragons are involved in some capacity or the other, and it looks like the show will be adapting 19 of them. We've met most of the cast already, which brings us to the next question: what will be their fates? Let's find out, and spoiler warning before you go down this road, because trust us, you'll need it. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Cyrax. Let's start with the fates that we do know about, starting with the first official dragon death of the Civil War. Cyrax was Prince Lucerys' splendid cream white mount that was born from the egg his mother placed in his cradle upon his birth. Both Luke and Cyrax are slightly de-aged in the show, but their role remains the same, becoming the first casualty in a war for vengeance. Cyrax got a better outing in the show than his book counterpart, because at least he managed to lead Vhagar on a fairly lengthy chase and get in a lick of his own before meeting his tragic fate. In the books, observers noted that there was an exchange of flames, a terrifying shriek, and then the two dragons locked in an embrace of death, from which Vhagar emerged victorious. Cyrax's body was broken to pieces, and his head and neck washed ashore the following day, unlike the show, where they replace it with his wing. Prince Lucerys' body was never found. Cyrax's remains were the only confirmation anyone needed for Aemon's action. Cyrax's death kind of mirrors Quicksilver's, for in Fire and Blood, he was said to be roughly a fifth of Vhagar's size. Before the battle beneath the God's Eye, Quicksilver was said to be a quarter of Balerion's size, and Vhagar is roughly as large now as the Black Dread was back then. Vhagar murdering Cyrax was just the latest example of uncles killing nephews in the Targaryen family. Cyrax's skull likely ended up in the Red Keep as part of the Targaryens' collection. The same can also be said for the next dragon. Mely's. Watching Mely's die was simultaneously depressing and a highlight of the season somehow. The Red Queen, known for her immense speed, played a huge role in keeping the Blacks alive. When Corlys blockaded the Gullet, Rhaenys and Mely's patrolled its skies day and night to ensure the Greens didn't come flying into their territory unannounced. The Red Queen was old by that point, but not so old that she couldn't pick up speed. She was still faster than Vhagar and Caraxes by a long shot. However, when Rhaenys got ambushed by Aegon and then Aemond at Rook's Rest, we bet you she wished she'd burned them within the Dragon Pit. The Blacks get no such opportunity in Fire and Blood, so the show decided to add that scene. They opened themselves up to scrutiny. After all, a politician as savvy as Rhaenys, who was willing to sacrifice her daughter's youth so she could become queen, suddenly got cold feet when she could have ended a war. Perhaps her penance was paying with her life, but she made damn sure that she went down with a fight. Fire and Blood's account of what happened at Rook's Rest doesn't hold a candle to what House of the Dragon accomplished in episode 4 of this season. That's how good the dragon battle was. Rhaenys and Mely's were whooping Sunfire's butt long before Aemond butted in, and they probably could have dealt with Vhagar too, had Rhaenys not been so distracted in the end. The death of the Queen Who Never Was and her dragon parallels that of the former's namesake in House of the Dragon. Aegon's Queen Rhaenys crashed through the Tower of Hellholt and collapsed its curtain wall with Meraxes, who was shot through the eye. Mely's might have been choked out by Vhagar, but call that a mercy. At least she wasn't ripped to pieces, like we thought she was fated to be. The Red Queen's severed head became a warning for traitors in the immediate aftermath of Rook's Rest, and then a reminder of the glory of House Targaryen once the dragons went extinct. Mely's was Vhagar's second dragon victim during the war, and she wouldn't be the last, highlighting the true perils of a war between dragons. Cyrax. Cyrax was the first dragon we saw in House of the Dragon. Rhaenyra was flying her around King's Landing, and when the princess landed, we saw how gentle and obedient her dragon was. TV Cyrax is a bit fiercer than book Cyrax, who's a bit of a pampered princess, just like her rider. In Fire and Blood, Cyrax is more of a court dragon, being kept in chains of her own volition and fed exceptionally well as the royal mount. Rhaenyra herself was a bit of a glutton, so Cyrax's size and feeding tendencies reflected her rider's personality, but she was large nonetheless, and of war size by the time the dance came around. Cyrax is certainly big in the show too, but she's nothing like her book counterpart in that she's frequently in and around conflict. Rhaenyra and her dragon have threatened to burn people on 4 separate occasions. The first 2 are the 2 meetings with Otto Hightower that she and Daemon have in Season 1. The third is when they come face to face with Seasmok. This encounter shows us that Cyrax is smaller than Seasmok, but leaner and probably faster. The final time that Rhaenyra's mount threatens to burn someone is when they lure Aemon back to Dragonstone, and Cyrax screeches at him and Vhagar in utter defiance. The pair clearly has a strong bond, that much clear when Cyrax felt her rider's pain during the birth of her stillborn daughter. But sadly, no true battle will ever come out of it. In the books, Cyrax was at least involved in an execution when Rhaenyra fed her the remains of Vaemond Balerion. Rhaenyra likes to talk about being the sword and the shield in the show, but she'll be neither. What she will be is a noose here as well, for she's overextended herself and will pay for her inexperience when she claims the throne. Cyrax will end up proving the dragon bond is exclusive in the most horrifying way possible, and toward the end of Rhaenyra's reign, a dragon will be pulled down by the very people she was supposed to rule over. The Yellow Queen will die in the streets of King's Landing, having never fought in an actual battle, much like her rider. And that's heartbreaking for us personally, because show Cyrax looks like she can actually go. Vermax. Speaking of regrettable deaths for dragons, if a dragon's death becomes honorable when it occurs in battle, then Vermax will end up in Dragon Valhalla. The mount of Prince Jacaerys is clearly a young dragon. That shot of him at the twins reminded us of that fact. Vermax is barely larger than Moondancer, and in the books, that is not at all the case. What's also different about the books is how much of a direct role Jace plays in the war, the absence of which has frustrated him in the show. In Fire and Blood, Jacaerys flew to the Vale and the North, treated with many great lords and formed pacts that were sealed with the presence of his dragon. Vermax was young there too, but he was described as being fierce and thriving. When he came back to Dragonstone, he took up the reins for his mother and divided his siblings, called for the dragon seeds, prepared them all for battle, the whole 9 yards. The riders that Rhaenyra is feasting in the finale are supposed to be Jace's, so seeing Ulf bully him when he should be kneeling to him is as frustrating as it is inaccurate. But that's not the point here. Throughout Season 2, Rhaenyra has pointed out the youth and inexperience of Jace and Vermax time and again. Whenever her son asks her permission to do something tangible, even as small as scouting for their enemies like Baelor, she denies him permission because she's afraid for him and also underestimating him. Jace isn't exactly clear-headed all the time either, mind you. His proposal to go meet Cole at Rook's Rest was madness at best, and he taking the whole bastard thing personally isn't becoming of him, but it's his reaction to all these perceived slights that make him realize he's his father's son after all. Arwen Strong was a man with a fiery temper, and although Jace has kept a lid on his, it might blow up soon enough. When it does, he'll find himself defending the gullet in an attempt to prove himself, and sadly will end up proving his mother right. All dragon riders' fates are closely linked to their dragons, and Jacaerys and Vermax are set to implode. It's a damn shame too, because he showed so much promise during his negotiations with Craig and Stark. Tarion. We'd like to think that George R.R. Martin created most of his dragons for the larger purpose of displaying the full power and might of House Targaryen, but with Tarion, he could have had another thing in mind, and that's because the Blue Queen is the only she-dragon that's ever recorded as having been a part of a dragon mating ritual. For the first half of the dance, he's the Hightower's only insurance down south. While the main dragon riders are engaged in conflicts in the Crownlands region, Daeron and Tarion secure the submission of most rebels in the Reach. They also take part in 2 rather horrific incidents, though one of them might not occur in the show, considering Maelor Targaryen has been deleted. Daeron burns Bitterbridge and then Tumbleton in revenge for the murder of his second nephew. In the show, Jacaerys has also been assassinated, so who knows? Maybe we'll see his adaptations of the burning of Harrenhal 2 times. Important part here is, after Daeron's death, Tarion becomes riderless, and instead of attacking an enemy dragon, she engages in a sort of dance with him, which observers can only think of as a mating dance. Tarion and Seasmok, who arrive at the scene to deal with the Greens, start rushing at one another before pulling up at the last second and disappearing into the clouds. They spew flames at each other, but somehow they're non-lethal, leaving Adam alive. And once this dance is concluded, Tarion and Seasmok team up to fight another large dragon from the Green Camp. All 3 of them end up losing their lives, but Tarion holds out the longest, being the youngest of them all. In the end, she had to be mercy killed via 3 arrows to the eye. We're not sure whether Tarion's skull is one of the 19 that the Targaryens once hung in their throne rooms, but we don't see any reason for it to not be. If that's true, then the Blue Queen is the only dragon we see mating, ever, and she dies shortly after, which is just, tragic. Stormcloud. And speaking of tragedies, we wish Stormcloud's age had been kept the same as it was in the books, because child slaughter in any form of any creature is always hard to watch. We'd say he's safe with the hired guards of the Vale, but who are we kidding here? You guys know we know better. The reason we wanted Stormcloud to be at least a shade older is because, well, then we might have gotten to witness its first and only flight. In Fire and Blood, the merchant cog called Gay Abandon is intercepted on its way to Pentos, and the men who board it aim to seize its holdings and enslave its crew. Since Aegon and Stormcloud are both 9 years old, they're able to escape the ship, flying to the safety of Dragonstone. Stormcloud dies an hour later, however, riddled with countless arrows and sporting a scorpion through his neck. Younger dragons have softer scales and their flesh is more easily penetrated. Stormcloud's death began the long association of the death of dragons that eventually saw his rider get called Dragonbane, but in the show, we're assuming things will be worse. Baby Stormcloud has barely set straw bales on fire and is as big as Daenerys' dragons from the Quarth arc. That translates to not nearly big enough to ride to safety or defend itself against a sea of enemies should he happen upon them. Aegon himself is far younger, still a babe, but near being old enough to plan and execute an escape. We're guessing whoever takes the ship takes him and his brother hostage. But as for Stormcloud, flying isn't written in his fate, it seems. He might take a cute little lap or two around Aegon's cabin, but that'll be the end of it. He can't travel long distances. Thrider and Dragon are too young to coordinate effectively. It's just a matter of time, really. Cyraxes will outlive the dragons of all of Joffrey's brothers, most certainly be because of his mother's overprotectiveness. Right now, the prince is 6 years old or so in the show, barely coming out of the haze of infancy. He knows how to walk, how to talk, and misses his mother very much. That's about it. In Fire and Blood, Joffrey is 11 during the dance, and Cyraxes is large and thriving, described as being only slightly smaller than Vermax and Arax. Joffrey can't quite ride his dragon to war, though he often begs his mother for leave to do the same. But he can't fly him over long distances. That's probably why Jane Arryn wasn't as annoyed with Rhaena in the book as she is in the show. In House of the Dragon, Cyraxes is a very young dragon, still wet from the egg, according to Lady Jane. But expecting him to take part in any battle is expecting too much when Joffrey didn't even fly him to the Vale. While he's remained at the Eyrie, he'll be a non-factor until his mother can do something about taking the capital. Once she does, she'll want all her children in her sights, so none can use them against her, and Joffrey and Cyraxes will arrive at King's Landing. Cyraxes will make himself a lair in the Dragon Pit, like the rest of the Black Dragons will, and that will be that. Once these two are separated, they never reunite, and Joffrey dies trying to get to his dragon. Cyraxes' death is a stark reminder of the brutalities of men, because we can blame the dragons for the destruction they cause, but there's no excuse for humans to ride out in droves and slaughter them. Cyraxes will end up becoming the focal point of the storming of the Dragon Pit, and his death being the most tragic of all the dragons penned up there. Trapped on both sides with a bloodlusted mob, Cyraxes twists and turns in his chains till he chokes himself to death, and his wing membranes are cut off to create dragonskin cloaks for his murderers. Cyraxes' skull is one of 5 that's displayed outside the Dragon Pit once the mob is done murdering them, serving as a grim reminder of how bad things can get when blood takes the wheel. Since he's going to be smaller in the show, his death will be more mortifying, we're sure. That is, if it plays out how it does in the books. Dreamfire. To say that we're glad Helaena isn't mad in the show is an understatement. The last thing the Blacks need is to worry about a dragon as large as Dreamfire joining the war, and luckily for Rhaenyra, a half-sister has never hated her as much as her half-brothers. Helaena herself is not of a warlike disposition. Besides, he despises Aemond after all that he's done to their family. Helaena has seen the future and knows exactly how the war will end, which means she's probably seen her role in it as well. That's probably why she refused riding Dreamfire to war so vehemently, because she knows it's not meant to be. But even if Helaena isn't aware of her personal future, she's been established as a kind, sweet and innocent character who mourns the death of crickets and wouldn't hurt a fly. So if Dreamfire isn't fated for war, then what is her fate? Well, it's the same as Cyraxes, only she's large enough to make a difference. Dreamfire is never ridden to war in her entire lifetime according to Fire and Blood. At the end of the dance, becomes restless and enraged. In the same way that Cyrax sensed Rhaenyra's pain when she was struggling with Visenya's labor, Dreamfire will feel the moment of Helena's death and try to fly out of the Dragon Pit in her fury, snapping 2 of her chains. When the pit gets stormed by the mad followers of the Shepherd, she snaps the remaining 2 and rains down fire and death on her would-be killers. Dreamfire slays the most of these wannabe dragon slayers out of all the other dragons combined, and ends that nightmare in a move that assures mutual destruction. While the large dragon was able to make passes at the crowds beneath her thanks to the Dragon Pit's size, couldn't move as well as she wanted to. She was getting injured. Besides, dragons are meant to fly in the open, so Dreamfire rose straight up into the air, into the ceiling of the Dragon Pit, causing it to collapse and the entire structure to fall to ruin, with that ending the lives of all dragons living in King's Landing, Dreamfire being the last of them. Vermithor. One dragon that will get to see a lot of action, however, is Vermithor, because he's formed a bond with a man of ambition. Hugh Hammer was introduced as a humble blacksmith that was just grateful for the king's kindness in the beginning. As the season has progressed, we've seen the darkness that lurks beneath his kind exterior, and that darkness boiled over when King's Landing was hard-pressed for food. Hugh knocked a man out and stole his sack of veggies to keep his family alive, but he was already too late. Hugh waited too long on the word of a man known for his infidelities. He told his wife his real identity. He said he couldn't refuse a call like this, because it was a make-or-break situation for him. He made it, taming the dragon of his grandsire Caris with his own fury and determination to protect an innocent woman. But as gallant as Sir Hugh was during the claiming, his ambition outweighs his gallantry. Before leaving his wife in King's Landing, he tells her she'll become a lady soon. That hasn't happened yet, and no doubt it's going to stick with him for the rest of his participation in the campaign. Hugh Hammer will give the war effort his all. He'll fly with Rhaenyra's dragon riders, secure the fall of King's Landing, and signal to the entire world that the era of dragon riders was back, and the time will come to give him his just due. His common ancestry will come into play and keep both him and Ulf down while Adam gets himself named a Balerion. There's only so much insult a man can take before his dam breaks. In case you forgot, Hugh now has the second largest dragon in the Seven Kingdoms. Before the war is done, he'll stake his claim to the Iron Throne, and bafflingly enough, he does have one. In the show, he's the son of Sarah Targaryen, the daughter of King Jaehaerys that became a pleasure house worker and rose to becoming pleasure house proprietor. In fact, it's possible that he attended the Great Council of 101 AC, because in Fire and Blood, 3 of the 14 claimants that had put forward their names were her sons. One of them looked the very image of Jaehaerys in his youth, and who knows, maybe that guy grew up to become Hugh. But the thing about treason is that it always finds its way back to you. That's exactly what will happen to Hugh Hammer. When it does, the Bronze Fury will wake up to a battlefield in action and unleash his flames on the attacking armies. You know how he told you that Tarion would eventually die fighting a large dragon? Well, that dragon is Vermithor, but the context of it isn't what you might be thinking right now. Needless to say, when 2 dragons attack one, they have a natural upper hand. Despite being the Bronze Fury, Vermithor doesn't survive the wounds he sustains in that battle. His remains were turned into a tourist attraction to help finance the rebuilding of the town they brought death and ruin to. Now that we've brought up 2 of the 3 participants in that death triangle, let's move on to the third. Seasmok. Mating rituals and being the dragon of the dead prince consort aside, Seasmok's main role in the dance isn't to cause destruction. It's to prove that even bastards can die with honor, professing their loyalty. When Adam claimed Seasmok, he was a bastard that hid his identity from his queen because he didn't want to rest on his father's laurels. When he gets legitimized, he becomes part of the storied lineage of House Velaryon, a privilege his fellow dragon riders do not get, despite being Targaryen bastards themselves in the show. The Westerosi have a rather grim opinion of bastards already. Adam's newfound title only makes him a target. When Hugh will do what he'll do, Rhaenyra will revert to her paranoid self and put a warrant out for all the dragon seeds. That includes Adam, who, instead of meekly surrendering, will resolve to prove his own worth. Flying away from King's Landing on Seasmok, he'll piece together an army to attack Hugh and his treason's forces, knowing that he doesn't stand a chance against their dragons. But he'll do it anyway, because Adam Velaryon wants to prove that not all bastards need to be disloyal. Rhaenyra's own sons are bastards, and she kept them safe her entire life from the scrutiny of men and questioning of ambitious lords. Adam might not have known this fact, but he wanted to prove he was worthy of that same trust. Prove it, he does. The son of the sea snake goes up against forces 4 times larger than his, and yet somehow, perhaps through the grace of the gods, he manages to do what he sets out to achieve. Seasmok is a third the size of Vermithor, and when Tarion joins the fight, all 3 dragons mortally wound each other. After their demise, Seasmok's remains join Vermithor's. While Adam's are eventually sent back to his brother. Alyn erects his tomb. He has only one word inscribed on it: loyal. Sunfire. To be perfectly clear with you guys, Sunfire is not dead, at least not yet. Anyway, the Golden Dragon was injured severely at the Battle of Rook's Rest, but like Kristen Cole told us in the very next episode, he left him behind to recover. The Blacks presumed that he's dead probably because they've been fed intel to that effect. And don't get us wrong, Sunfire is dying. He had his chest ripped open, his wing mangled, and his entire body burnt by the near 2-century-old furnace that is Vhagar. It's a miracle that either him or Aegon were even breathing in the immediate aftermath of their collapse. The fact that people think Sunfire is dead must mean they can't find him, which also means that somewhere in in the bogs and pines of Cracklaw Point, he must be alive. In the books, he disappears after forces loyal to the Blacks try to kill him while retaking Rook's Rest. Not sure if that'll be addressed in the show. Either way, dragons reflect their riders' dispositions, and Aegon has proved himself to be a survivor. Sunfire will survive as well and eventually be reunited with his beloved rider. He's a young dragon, so his healing ability is far better than Vhagar's. Though his wing will never be the same, he'll be fly over short distances, like the distance between Rook's Rest and Dragonstone. Their reunion will not be long-lived, for he'll have to fight dragons again, but Sunfire the Golden will spend the remainder of his life with his rider, as he was fated to. He'll take on so many injuries thanks to his trio of battles that he'll end up succumbing to his wounds, but not before taking a monarch with him. His demise will take the only thing close to Aegon more than his own mother away, and that'll be one heartbreaking scene to watch, no matter how cruel Aegon becomes in the end. Grey Ghost. We were hoping we'd see Grey Ghost during the sowing, but now that we won't, we know he'll show up in Season 3 for one specific purpose. Or rather, his remains will. Grey Ghost is one of the 2 dragons that Sunfire will kill and devour in the twilight of his life. Because this battle takes place mostly off-page, we don't even know if we'll see it yet. Word about it spreads due to sailors, and Grey Ghost's body is the only evidence it even happened. Still, we're hopeful we'll get to see at least some of it, because we want to know whether Sunfire actually looks like a golden fire-breathing chicken after recovering from his injuries. Moondancer. The Baelor in House of the Dragon has only one thing common with her book counterpart, and that's the desire to prove herself a true Targaryen princess. In Fire and Blood, both Baelor and her dragon were much younger than they are in the show, which is why they weren't allowed to participate in the war. But in the show, Moondancer's already proven her worth by helping the Blacks understand the movement of the Greens. Now that Rhaenyra's plan to take King's Landing is in place, and she has far larger dragons at her command, she has no need of Baelor. She'll become the defender of Dragonstone, and it's just as well, because Dragonstone will need defending. Like we said a few entries earlier, what goes around, comes around. Rhaenyra takes King's Landing with treachery, be it a mother's in the show or Mysarea's in the books. She'll lose her own seat to the same thing. When that happens, Baelor will truly become the defender of Dragonstone. Moondancer is rather young, but she's also extremely swift. She's gonna need that for the first and only dragon fight of her life, but she'll be contending with a golden chicken. That's right, folks. Baelor's queen moment will come when she takes on the king himself. Considering Sunfire's condition, Moondancer should have an advantage, at least in terms of mobility. But in the end, she's far smaller than the Golden Dragon, and Baelor lives life post-dance dragonless. You can put 2 and 2 together, but Moondancer is not going to go down without a fight. The Mount of Daemon Targaryen's daughter, after all. Caraxes and Vhagar. And speaking of Daemon, let's talk about him and his bloodworm Caraxes. You pretty much know by now that Daemon and Caraxes are fated to fight and kill Aemond and Vhagar. They'll go through hell and back to make it to that battle, for it's been prophesied. So the question then becomes, how will it go down? Vhagar's proven herself capable of handling Melys. Before Vermithor, she was one of the Black's largest dragons. Daemon wasn't even sure he could handle Vhagar by himself at the start of Season 1, so how will he do it all alone? Well, the answer seems to lie in the bloodworm's anatomy. When we saw Caraxes' noodle neck, we wondered why the showrunners had designed him like that. Yeah, it's a cool mutation, sure, but there has to be more reason to it than that, right? Well, turns out there is. What if? Hear us out on this. Caraxes wraps his neck around Vhagar's like a snake and chokes him out. It's a big ass, but if you ask us, it's the only move he has. Vhagar was pretty much unaffected by Melys' claws. The pattern isn't clear yet. All the dragons die fighting dragons. Maybe caught in a snake-like death spiral is how Caraxes and Vhagar go. But before they depart, Vhagar will remind the world what the terror of a Targaryen truly feels like. This battle will be the penultimate one in the death of the dragons, and be a catalyst of sorts for their eventual extinction. But not all dragons will die. Silverwing. Now that we've gone through the death section of this video, let's talk about the living a little. One of the only claimed dragons that will survive the dance is Silverwing. Ulf White is an ambitious prick that drinks too much and talks even more, but those 2 things will come back to haunt him. When they do, Silverwing will become riderless. The question then becomes, what happens to her? This is a great mystery, because the last we hear of Silverwing, she goes wild and builds a lair for herself at Red Lake. Red Lake is a mythic lake located in the northern region of the Reach, near the coast of the Sunset Sea. It's mythic because there, a song of Garth Greenhand, Brandon of the Bloody Blade, killed so many children of the forest that it turned the Blue Lake red. And that's right, Red Lake was called Blue Lake, and now it's the site of a massacre of extremely powerful magical beings. It's interesting that Silverwing chooses this place as her final known lair, because a few decades after the dance, all dragons disappear from Westeros. This is no spoiler, because it was mentioned in the main series. but the last dragon dies in 156 AC. That means sometime between now and that year, Silverwing will either die or fly off somewhere. But where? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Cannibal, another dragon we were hoping to see during the sowing. Now we doubt we'll ever catch a glimpse of the cannibal. He was supposed to be the one that killed Silver Dennis, not Vermithor, and Fire and Blood has no other role for him apart from being a suspect in Grey Ghost's murder. They do say that he flies overhead during the funeral of one of its key figures. Considering how Ryan Condal is treating all the obscure mentions from the novel like gospel, he might be goofy enough to show us Cannibal then. But apart from that, we don't think we'll ever see him, as he just disappears after the dance. The Cannibal is one of the last known living dragons, and he doesn't even die, he just flies away to parts unknown. But you know whose fate we already know? Sheep Stealer. Guess how you already know what happened to Sheep Stealer? Well, if you've seen the first season of Game of Thrones, you might remember Timett, son of Timett, right? The guy with the burnt-out eye? Well, turns out Timett's mountain clan created that ritual originally as a test to survive a fire witch and her dragon, who had taken up residence in the Mountains of the Moon. We don't know whether the witch will be a part of the show, but we've already seen the dragon, Sheep Stealer. House of the Dragon has got this entire storyline going on with Rhaena Targaryen, where she's attempting to tame Sheep Stealer, which creates some interesting storyline complications. These complications begin and end with one question: how does Sheep Stealer get away? See, in Fire and Blood, Sheep Stealer and Nettles have a pretty clear life trajectory. Once Rhaenyra is out for bastard blood, they both fly into the Mountains of the Moons to live out their lives as hermits. They're only discovered once by the Crown's forces, but they escape and are only heard of again when Tarion learns of the traditions of the Burned Men. For Rhaena to follow this entire storyline, she'd have to abandon her family, which is just not what her character is all about. Rhaena only wants to prove her own worth. Once she has her dragon, she'll do everything she can to prove herself worthy, like Baelor. But in this process, she's also left the lives of Rhaenyra's sons in the hands of Vaelman, which is extremely irresponsible at best, and dangerous to their lives at worst. In Fire and Blood, one of the reasons Nettles is exiled is because Rhaenyra comes to believe she's sleeping with Daemon, but first-hand accounts of their interactions make them feel like father and daughter. That's the angle that the show has clearly decided to lean into. So, how will Sheep Stealer's disappearance pan out? Will Rhaena shoo him away like Arya did Nymeria? Will she be exiled and banished to the Mountains of the Moon, never to be seen again? Or will Sheep Stealer die in a battle, or perhaps something worse? We don't know what'll happen, but his status just went from alive, questionable, and our money's on the last of those three options, as morbid as it sounds. Mourning. Well, if Rhaena has Sheep Stealer, she can't have mourning now, can she? Not quite, because A, we still have Baelor, and B, they focused on dragon eggs and their clutch is too much for them to not include mourning. The whole point of foreshadowing is having a payoff that delivers, and all these shots of dragon eggs and these 4 eggs that were sent to the Vale would be meaningless without mourning, especially because at the end of the dance, she's the only dragon under Targaryen control. Mourning is about as big as baby Stormcloud at the time, but she lives and is a sign of a new era. Whether that sign will come in the show or not, we don't know, but we know what happens to Moondancer, and we know that symbolism is really important to Ryan Condal and George R.R. Martin. Mourning is one of the most important symbols from the dance, so if she doesn't show up in the show, we'll be disappointed, and don't tell us we didn't warn you. Marvelous verdict. As for this video, well, that's all we've got. Let us know which dragon fate you're looking forward to witnessing most down in the comments, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Till then, do remember, history is written in fire and blood. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.